Tonight we are going to be talking about grief and bereavement and mourning, and a lot of what we're going to do kind of flows into next week. Next week we're really going to talk about basic pastoral care issues and all these topics that we've talked about over the last now 6 weeks. How do we as God's people care for God's people? And we're kind of right now in my wheelhouse. These are the things that I really like to pay attention to and enjoy dealing with. And so let's get started. I thought that was kind of fun. I've heard it said other ways. But that's the Baptist version, I think, of this cartoon. Okay? Oh, that's good. Let's get a good working definition of grief. And I think this is important. That we have a good definition to work with throughout the night. Grief is the normal and natural emotional reaction to loss or change of any kind. And this is important. Grief is neither a pathological condition nor a personality disorder. If you go home tonight and open up your Old Testament to the prophet Joel, in the first 6 or 7 verses, the prophet Joel is talking about the land being invaded by locusts. And then about another verse or 2 later, it makes the same comment about the locust. Good colleague, friend of mine, Yaakov Haman, is writing a book about Joel, who he calls the neglected prophet. And one of the things he noticed in the Hebrew was that, a lot of times we get words in English that we understand in English, but in Hebrew or Greek, there's completely different meaning. What Yaakov says in these first few verses of the prophet Joel, the first locust refers to those things that eat away at us, very slow, very methodical, painful, gut-wrenching, slow. Maybe the best, worst example of that would be ALS. That most often ALS begins in the feet and simply just eats away at one until it takes the life. The best book, the best worst book, is written by a sports journalist, a guy named Mitch Albom, Tuesdays with Maury. If you've read the book, the movie was absolutely horrible, so don't even waste your time with the movie. But Mitch Albom was up late one night traveling, and Ted Koppel, the ABC late night show, Ted Koppel was interviewing Maury Schwartz, and he had been diagnosed with ALS. And Maury Schwartz was Koppel's favorite professor in college, and so he dedicated the rest of his life to going and visiting with Maury every Tuesday. It didn't matter where he was there every Tuesday. It is a fascinating book, but that's that slow, inching away, eating away locust. The second locust mentioned in the prophet is the one that just gets you. It's the fast, aggressive, out of the blue, comes from nowhere, like a thief in the night. And so the first could be what we would consider ALS or a cancer diagnosis. And the second could be a heart attack or an automobile accident or some violent act. Okay? And so we experience grief in all kinds of ways. We experience those slow, agonizingly slow locusts, or those very quick locusts. But the point is, our response is very normal. Our response is natural. And it is not a pathological condition. Pop test, if you were here on the first Wednesday and we talked about depression and all the symptoms associated with depression, and one could be considered depressed unless one is post-surgical or one is experiencing grief and bereavement. Grief and bereavement looks like major depressive disorder. And a lot of times, well-meaning people go to well-meaning doctors and don't tell well-meaning doctors exactly what's going on, and the well-meaning doctor prescribes an antidepressant. Well, an antidepressant is not going to help grief. Someone could be depressed and grieving, yet if they're in a grief episode, they're not depressed. They may be later. Everyone grieves at their own pace. This is important. We're going to look at a Kubler-Ross slide in a moment. And one of the things we're going to talk about next week, if I'm sitting with someone, for example, I was 19 years old. I was a first semester sophomore in college. My dad was 50 years old, and he died. Fell over, dead. Okay? Well, I could probably travel around the country, and I could say, I could find a lot of guys, middle class, Euro-American, Deep South Protestants, who at 19 years old, their 50-year-old father died suddenly. Okay? John?
Mine did too.
Okay, thank you. I cannot say to John Phillips, I know how you feel. My experience can never be his experience. Because John had a different relationship with his dad than I had with my dad. And one of the things we get into is we begin to think that if I got through it, then everybody's going to get through it the way I got through it. Because I'm always right. You don't need Google around me, okay? Just ask me. So we get into trouble when we want to believe that people are going to grieve in a certain way. And we're going to talk about Kubler-Ross, and she did some really cool things for us. But at the end of her life, she wrote that she wished she had never written the book. What Kubler-Ross did, she was a psychiatrist. She worked at the University of Chicago Medical Center in the 50s, 60s, 70s. She wrote a really cool book called On Death and Dying. And this was a day and time, if you remember, when if someone got a cancer diagnosis, you didn't tell him because you didn't want to upset him. And so Kubler-Ross went to all the doctors, all the physicians, and said, can you tell me some of your patients who are dying? I'm doing some research. I don't have anybody dying. Really? Well, there were people dying every day. So what she did the right thing. She went to the nurses. And she got all the patients who had been given terminal diagnosis. And this was a day and time, as you remember, when hospitals kept patients as long as they possibly could. Because the longer they kept them, the more money they made. Today, the shorter the stay, the more money they make. Things have changed. That's true, okay? You can't make that up. Okay. And so what Kubler-Ross did was she went around and started interviewing these people. And she also noticed some things. She noticed that when a patient was given a terminal diagnosis, families visited less often. And doctors who had to make rounds every day stayed for shorter lengths of time. Now, you know, I've got a triple-digit IQ, okay? So I'm going to figure out if I'm laying there in bed and my family's not showing up as often and the doctor's not staying as long and nobody's talking to me, something bad's happened, okay? So Kubler-Ross started talking with these people. And what she found out was this pattern. And this pattern is not for those who get attacked by a fast-moving locust. This was written for people, for patients who were given a terminal diagnosis. And what she says is that the first stage that people go into is denial. I cannot believe this is happening. Okay? Disbelief, denial, and that's not a bad thing. We're going to talk about this more tonight and next week. Denial is not a bad thing. Okay? I really do believe that when things like this happen to us, God gives us this kind of natural anesthesia that numbs us up. And I can usually take the truth in chapters, but don't give me War and Peace, because I probably cannot digest all of that truth in one sitting. But I can take truth in chapters. In the times that I've had significant grief, I know that I was able to let it in small bits. Denial is not a bad thing. Denial is a very good thing. It's kind of like guilt. We talked about guilt a couple of weeks ago. Typically, what Kubler-Ross realized was that when people moved through the denial, they got to their anger. Anger about the diagnosis, anger about the condition, anger about a life-limiting prognosis, probably anger that family doesn't visit as often and doctors come for shorter stays. And people move through a period of anger. Now, what people are thinking is, well, how long does denial last? How long does anger last? As long as it needs to last. And one of the populations that is guilty of trying to move people through, the clergy. Because we're supposed to be able to help everybody to move through these processes and get back on their feet and da-da-da-da. And folks just don't move like that. Bargaining. There's a great Burt Reynolds movie, and he's out on a boat on a lake, and he can't swim. And he falls out of the boat, and he's trying to get to shore, and so he starts this great scene where he's thrashing and trying to not drown, and he says, Lord, if you save me, I will give up alcohol, I'll give up tobacco, I'll give up women. And he gets a little bit closer and he says, Lord, if you save me, I'll give up alcohol and I'll give up tobacco. And he gets a little bit closer. Lord, if you save me, I'll give up alcohol. You know, and he gets to the end and he says, oh, thank you, Lord. Still have women. You know. Bargaining. And so people start to bargain. God, if you do this, I'll do this. I mean, there have been, this is when y'all want to get the pledge cards out, okay? This is the season. Tis the season to be tithing. Lord, if you'll save me, I'll tithe. Finally, I'll tithe. I got the message. Okay. And that doesn't work. Okay? Depression, which is not depression as we've been talking about depression. It is sadness and anger. a sense of abundant hopelessness. I'm gonna show you a slide of a piece off of old sitcom Wings, if you remember Wings, kind of a funny sitcom. And then acceptance. Most of us have never really liked the word acceptance, because really the truth of the matter is we don't really get to acceptance. What we get to is acknowledgement. But what I want you to do is, Wings was an old sitcom, and this is kind of a fun little segment. Is that right?
Put the handheld up on the speaker.
Really unbelievable. You'd think you two would have something better to do than sit around speculating on my measurements. So juvenile.
So happens that I'm trying to remember the combination. It's padlock.
Good.
Something feels pretty confused right now.
Sorry. I'm not bored. Sorry.
Good thing with that padlock. Maybe to you it is.
I get over the cold last night, sick as a dog.
Well, by all means, why don't you sit here next to me and my food?
Thanks. I was up half the night sneezing my guts out, damn near brought the house down. Oh God, no, not again.
Be careful. What was that?
What the hell do you think it was? It was a sneeze.
It was like a little baby sneeze.
Look, I happen to be a very sick man. The last thing I need right now is you giving me grief, pal. Achoo. Oh, do it again.
Does anyone know where I can get a shotgun?
What kind? Double barrel, pump action, 12 gauge, or what? Just because a woman my age takes up a hobby, does that have to be knitting? I shoot skeet.
How are you at squirrels? I got an attic full of them.
Oh, you can shoot a 40 pencils with a squirrel.
Faye, these are not little cute cartoon squirrels. These are sick, demented little vermin that have kept me up for the last 3 nights.
You haven't slept at all?
Not a wink.
So am I calling an exterminator?
No, I'm gonna get them myself. Using the charms, whatever it takes. This time, it's personal.
Morning, Joe. Hey, I didn't start the day with bad news, but did you all hear about Weed Gilroy?
Well, what did Nan got his biggest coup do this time?
He died.
Oh.
Looks like a little moves up a notch.
Well, apparently just went to sleep. I mean, the guy was almost 90.
Who is this Weed Gilroy?
He was a mechanic who worked here years ago. I mean, he was a nice guy. He was a touch on the odd side.
Yeah, no kidding. Remember all those inventions of his? My favorite was the Mexican jumping beanbag chair. Furniture that rearranges itself.
I wonder how Lowell's going to take the news.
That's right, because Weed was like a second father to him. He told him how to be a mechanic.
Did they ever finish putting that plane together?
No, I don't think they ever got it off the ground, but they sure took a lot of time working on it. Man, it's gonna be rough on him. I wonder if he even knows.
Oh, that's a great one, Ernie. I especially like the way you started it with knock knock. I've got to come up with more of those.
Yeah, Joe?
Can we see in my office?
I don't know. Hang on a second. Can you see me?
Stay in there, Lowell. Well, sit down. We have to talk to you. sometimes in life, things happen that we're not really prepared for.
Wait a minute, am I fired? I thought we were a family around here. Where's the support group that we've established?
You're not fired, okay? Just listen. Sometimes in life, things happen to friends of ours.
Oh, Faye's fired.
No, this is about a friend of yours, an old friend. I know this is going to be easy for you, but we found out this morning that Lee Gilroy passed away.
No, he didn't.
Yeah, lonely. Didn't he?
No, Lee Gilroy's not dead. Hey, you probably just saw him with his teeth out. Lee Gilroy dead. That's a pretty good one, huh? I'll see you guys later.
No, that went well.
Oh, it's obvious he's in denial.
Yeah, that's right, denial. I remember that from college. It's one of the 5 stages people go through in coping with grief. Over the next few months, he'll probably go through anger, bargaining, depression, and then finally, acceptance.
I'm angry as hell at Lee for dying. I'd trade anything to get him back. God, what's the use? It's hopeless. He's gone. But what are you going to do? Life goes on.
Some people go through it faster than others.
Thank y'all for, I love that.
Yes, it's been 4 nights in a row, but not tonight. We gave up, called the exterminators, they're at my house right now. They're not gonna kill the bullets.
How does it turn it off? There we go. Okay. So, everybody grieves at their own pace. One of Cooper Ross's comments later in life was that these 5 stages are really quite fluid. She never meant for them to be rigid, that we go through denial and then we go through anger and then we go through bargaining, that one can move up and down these 5. And what we have people believing is that, okay, I've been in denial or I've been angry, so I can't revisit that. And so what happens is then that cuts off a natural expression of thoughts and feelings, and that's what we're trying to do, is to say that we go up and down through these stages and never in an orderly fashion. I remember in college there was a stress scale developed by 2 guys, Holmes and Ray, and there was a 100-point stress scale down to 1, and there was a loss identified with 100 points and 99 points, and their theory was that if you accumulated 350 points in 4 months, you were going to get sick. And it really does have a lot of validity to it. But it talked about loss of spouse and loss of child, loss of parent, divorce, job, and so the point is that there are more losses than we can possibly ever imagine, and we all are faced with grief events all the time. And a lot of times we don't even pay attention to the losses. There are people, and we could probably divide up the room and debate this, there are people who say that their divorce was more difficult than the death of their spouse. That with the death of the spouse, there at least was closure. It was permanent. With divorce, there's still another heart beating, there's still potential for relationship, there's still the pain and the agony of all that went through. And I think that depends on one's experience. But for me to assume that this loss is greater for you than that loss is really unfair, and it's just not true. Loss of health, we have talked about that. One of the hardest things that I do, and I would rather do it than the family do it, but one of the hardest things I have to do is to say to someone, you need to give your car keys to your children. There's nothing more painful, okay? And I would rather that the person be angry with me than the kids, or, but that, it's a loss of health, it's a loss of independence, it's a loss of freedom, it's a loss of what I've known for so many years. And that is a grief experience. That is a significant grief experience. If you remember, when we talked about suicide, the second week, we talked about loss of occupational identity. That's not a loss of a job. That's not getting the pink slip at 42, which is difficult, and having to go out and find work. This is what happens at retirement when one is no longer a whatever. There's a loss of occupational identity. One of the things we talked about the second week in the whole suicide talk was that 65-year-old Euro-American, 65-year plus Euro-American males are leading the way in this country in suicides. And a lot of that has to do with we have so many Vietnam vets that are now 65 and older, and so many people who are dealing with loss of occupational identity. That is a grief experience. Loss of relationships. And then you get to all the intangible losses. Loss of dreams. What I wanted is not going to happen. Families who experience a SIDS, a sudden infant death. Okay, there is the loss of life, but there's also the loss of dreams. Everything that we had hoped for that child. There's the intangible. There's the loss of identity. I read something recently that if my wife dies, I'm a widower. Ladies, if your husband dies, you're a widow. They give a name. But what if you lose your child? There's no name for that. We've never given that a name. Are you still a father? Are you still a mother? And so there's the loss of identity. And that's painful. Grief reactions, again, are very similar to depressive disorders. And if a grief reaction is not treated, particularly those fast-moving, aggressive locusts, okay, if grief reactions are not treated, the trauma can eventually send someone into a grief response that looks just like a depressive disorder. A lot of folks have come up with different processes like Kubler-Ross to talk about sudden loss. And if you've ever experienced sudden loss, there's a significant amount of shock and trauma and numbness. And I try to tell people that you're going to have all sorts of reactions. You're not going to sleep. You're not going to eat. You're going to be easily irritable. You're going to have depressed mood, dysphoric mood, for days and weeks and months, depending on the loss. One of the things Kubler-Ross said was that when we lose someone significant, and I even kind of don't want to say this, but just to make the point, when we lose someone who is significant, a spouse, okay, a child, okay, what she believed was a normal grief process was somewhere around 18 months. Wow. Now, what that means really is absolutely nothing, okay? Because Lowell went through it in about 7 seconds, okay? Okay. But I have sat with people who have grieved significantly for 2 and 3 and 4 years. And I've sat with people who've grieved significantly for 6 or 8 or 10 months. Okay? And so I think one of the things we need to pay attention to is there is not one gold standard. There is not one model for how to deal with this. But shock and trauma and numbness certainly are part of the process. There are a lot of books that talk about being a companion. We're going to talk more about this next week. But if we're going to talk about how we care for the grieving, we're going to talk about things like this. I am going to try to connect with someone at an emotional level. Okay? I don't think it's ever important to talk about things up here. Why is that? Because the person who is grieving is not living up here. The person who's grieving is living here. This is the work of the soul. This is the work of the spirit. And so if I'm going to try to help someone, I'm not going to say things like, you know, he was such a good guy, he accomplished this and he accomplished this, and he did this, and he did this, and he did this. And you've all grieved. So does that really matter to you in your grief? Probably not. What you want is that someone can connect with your spirit. There's a theme here. Companioning is about listening with the heart. Not about analyzing with the head. In some religious traditions, when the pastor goes to officiate a funeral in the funeral home, he usually, in that case, he is always clear to get the card. Okay? of preachers love to read that card, and that card is Who's Who. It's kind of a short version of Matthew 1, okay? I was at a funeral several years ago over Mobile, a young kid related to Sandra's family, and he had not had a relationship with his birth father, and the birth father heard about the accident and the death, and so he comes to the funeral. It turns out he's not sitting with the family. He's sitting right in front of Sandra and me. And the pastor's up there reading the deceased and mother and stepfather and grandparents and da-da-da. And this guy had all he could take. And he stood up. I didn't know who he was. He stood up, and in his grief and tears, he raised his hand, and the preacher looked at him and kind of acknowledged him. And he said, I'm the original father. And I wept. Because he wanted someone to speak to his gut. And the preacher was sitting there, everything was neck up. So what people who are grieving want is for someone who can listen with the heart. Now, I know what the guy meant to say was, I'm the biological father. And he was so upset. He said, I'm the original father. Wow. God's with us. Companioning is also about walking alongside. It is not about leading. And one of the things that we tend to do, what do we tend to tell people who are grieving? I can tell you some of the worst things I've heard. Snap out of it. Snap out of it. We're going to get to that. They're in a better place. When my dad died, I heard, you've now got to be the man of the house. That's a weird thought. If you think about it. We tell people to get busy. We tell people to go get a part-time job. We tell people to go volunteer. Do what?
Time will heal.
Yeah.
Things will look better tomorrow.
Things will look better tomorrow, yeah. For man, yeah. Yeah. James Taylor has a son, Ben Taylor, a son of James and Carly Simon. And he didn't quite make it as big as his dad did. But he's really a good musician, has a good band, and has really written some good songs. And one grief song, the lyric goes, they say time kills the pain, but I know that pain kills the time. Isn't that right up? What other bad words have y'all heard? Pardon? It's God's will. Yeah. So companioning is about walking alongside. It's about not getting people in a hurry. It's about being able to sit and be and not have to do. It's about being helpless and letting helplessness be okay. It's about not being in a hurry. there was some research done several years ago with a group of chaplains in a hospital, and these 3 or 4 chaplains went to visit several patients, and they made sure they timed the visit at exactly 3 minutes. And half of the chaplains stood, and half of the chaplains went in, got a chair, and sat. And later on that afternoon, the interviewers went in and said, "You got a visit from chaplain today, blah, blah, blah." And they just asked them questions. How long did the visit last? Every patient who had a visit from a chaplain who sat said over 5 or 6 minutes. Every chaplain who had every patient who had a chaplain who stood said under 3 minutes. All the visits were 3 minutes. So there's something about going in and being with and sitting, about not having to leave. Companioning means discovering the gifts of silence. It does not mean filling up every moment with words. How long, just think to yourself, how long could you allow for there to be silence in here without me talking or you making a comment? What?
That's enough. They
Uh,
say 8 seconds.
8 seconds, thank you. That's not the world record, but that's good. What we try to teach at the hospital is what we call being the non-anxious presence of God. And Father Keating, Thomas Keating, his great quote is, "God's first language is silence. Everything else is but a poor translation." And so I do think it's important that we get to a place where we can be still and be quiet, because that's when the person grieving is going to do his or her best work. Okay, they're not going to get better because I'm so smart. They're going to get better because there's enough silence that allows the person to do their own work. So what do we do with people who grieve? And we're going to do some of this next week because repetition is a great way to learn. We listen. I've spent 35 years training pastors in a process called clinical pastoral education. And one of the things we talk about early on is, what do you think your gifts and skills are? What are your gifts and graces and talents for ministry? And they say uniformly, I listen well. Great. And then they start bringing in their work. And it's a written form, and it's called a verbatim. And their words take up this much space on the paper, and then the patient has this much. And then the chaplain pastor has this much. And so I'll say, you indicated to me 2 weeks ago that you were a good listener. We don't listen, okay? And one of the reasons why we fail to listen is We are so busy trying to figure out what to say that we don't give the person grieving enough space. Okay? So listen. Working with people who are grieving should never involve theological conversations. These people probably do not need for you to interpret the love and will of God. My favorite one that I hate the most is God will never give you more than you can bear. I hear it all the time. I've always encouraged people to show me that in Scripture. They can't. So it's important to refrain from theological conversations. Why? Because theological conversations are about the intellect. Now, if we want to sit around one morning and talk about the difference between Bart and Bultmann, we can do that. But we're going to do that here. We're not going to do that with people in their grief. Never begin a sentence with "at least." At least you had your dad for 19 years, I heard, in 1970. Some kids don't have their dad that long. So what do I feel guilty? At least, Jane, at least the kids are out of the house and educated and on their own. Well, that makes me feel a whole lot better.
At least he didn't suffer.
At least he didn't suffer. Yeah. And then where did you get your medical degree? At least he didn't suffer.
So do you think people are trying to move that person to gratitude?
They're trying to move that person out of their grief, I think, because they're so uncomfortable with the person's grief. They want to lead rather than be with. Yeah. But I think there are a lot of reasons. I think it could be, and I think it's well-intentioned. Okay, I don't think people say these things to be hurtful. Okay, I know they're well-intentioned. I mean, 12 years ago, I got a prostate cancer diagnosis. And I was walking through the hospital, had just gotten the diagnosis, and I was looking, I'm rather forlorn, I'm sure. And this nurse passed me and said hi, and I said hi, and she said, "Doc." I said, "Hey." She said, "You don't look good. You okay?" I said, "No, I just got a prostate cancer diagnosis." She said, "Oh man, I'm sorry, my husband died of that." And my first thought was, I cannot wait to tell my students. Okay? Never begin a sentence. If you're sitting with someone who's grieving, never begin a sentence with "at least." You know why I say that? It's because you don't want anybody to say that to you. And this is where silence, you can learn to manage it. This is where silence comes in handy. Because you can be the non-anxious presence of God. Avoid theological cliches. Let's see how many. Now, interesting thing about cliches. Okay? A cliche got to be a cliche because at one time it was a profound, helpful comment that became overused and it became meaningless. The only problem is people still use them. So in 1977, I was doing my first year residency in clinical training at Southern Baptist Hospital, New Orleans, Louisiana. I was on call. I got paged about 2 a.m. to the neonatal intensive care unit, pediatric intensive care unit. I go down there, and this beautiful 18-month-old baby had died. And I was standing there with these grieving parents. They had called their pastor. The pastor comes in, and I introduce myself, and the rule is I kind of back up and let him take over. And he said to these two grieving parents, when God picks the flowers, He only picks the loveliest. And I thought, on that September day in 1977, with a 2-year-old and a 6-month-old, I hope to God that God thinks my kids are ugly. God never gives you more than you can bear. God is good all the time. All the time, God is good. It's in a better place. It's God's will. We don't always understand God's will. We just have to live in God's will. This is part of God's plan for your life. Y'all help me? Any others? Or we can be here in silence. What others have you heard? Or had said to you? What?
Things will be better tomorrow.
Things will be better tomorrow. Yeah, spread it on Annie.
God needed another angel.
God needed another angel. You know what's wrong with that statement? God doesn't need anything. Okay? That's great. It's great to hear about this husband and wife, and they're really, really, really close. And I love baseball. I love Major League Baseball. And they're really, really close. And he loves baseball, loves baseball, loves baseball. And so they make this pact that if she predeceases him, she's somehow going to communicate to him. Okay, and so she predeceases him. And about 2 days later, she comes to him in a dream. And she says, "Dear, I've got good news and bad news." I said, "What's that?" "Good news is baseball is hot up here. Everybody plays baseball. Loves baseball." "What's bad news?" "You're the starting pitcher Saturday night." I don't know where that one came from. Yeah, God needed. No, God doesn't need anything. What else have you heard?
He's in a better place.
He's in a better place.
Don't be sad. He's got no more pain.
Don't be sad, he's got no more pain.
No more pain.
No more pain. Right. Exactly. Thank you.
What you did deserve this.
What?
What you did deserve this.
Yeah, that's like Job's friends. Yeah, go back and read Job tonight if you have nothing to do, okay? Because that first group of people were pretty rough on Job, okay? And they were not very helpful. But then those guys came, 7? They came and what'd they do? What does Scripture say they did with Job? Y'all aren't going to like this. They sat there for 7 days and did not speak. In my grief, in my pain, in my sadness, I want someone who is willing to come and sit with me and shut up. Unless I ask something or need something. Say, don't ever get into your head. Don't ever try to move me anywhere. Don't ever give me any stupid cliche. Refrain from questions. Well, what happened? Had he been sick? Had he been to the doctor? Was he taking his medicine? Was he sleeping? How was his diet? Have you talked to the kids lately? Have you seen the doctor? Why'd you kill him? Yeah. Why'd you kill him?
Put some of those things though in obituaries, reading the obituaries in the paper, sometimes it's just incredible.
They are. And we have to pay for those now, I think. They're not cheap. Yeah. But the point is, what's the purpose of a question to someone who is grieving? The purpose is to fill up the air with noise.
We're uncomfortable in silence.
Thank you. We're uncomfortable in silence. So far, we've gotten to 8 seconds. Want to try for 10? 8 seconds. Refrain from questions. They serve no purpose. One of the best things, and perhaps the best thing we can do with people in their grief, I think obviously first is to understand that it's natural, it's not contagious. You can get really, really close to it, and it's not going to jump off on you and get into your soul. But to get really, really close to it, and to get really, really quiet around it, and to say, tell me about John.
What about just offering your hand to somebody?
Sure.
Why do we expect cliches from priests?
Why do we do what?
Expect cliches from priests. Or do we?
Well, I'm not sure we do. That would be I think what we expect from our priest, what I expect from my priest is somehow connect with where I hurt. Okay? I don't expect a cliche. Okay? How do we allow people to reminisce and to get into all of those holy stories? I have this is on next week's slide. Really, really neat guy named Parker Palmer has done a lot of work around this. And what he says, and I'll show it next week, what he says is that the attempt to fix is really an attempt to keep somebody at bay. It gives the appearance of wanting to be close and intimate, but the attempt to fix really is quite the opposite. It keeps people. And what he says is, in our pain, in our longing, we do not want to be fixed. We want to be heard. We want to have our sacred stories heard. It's hard work to grieve if you have had your season of grief, you know that is physically painful. I think it's the equivalent to running a marathon. It will wear you out.
Hey, Don.
Yeah.
Is there sort of a time frame that some of that slide changes? You know, like I think you're sort of talking about at the beginning of the event. You know, the death has just occurred, you show up to the house, you don't want to ask questions, you just want to be with them. But at some point, you want to see how they're doing.
Yeah, but I think this is also a good process if someone is 12 months into their grief. Okay, I can say, tell me how you are. Tell me how you're feeling. But see, I think that comes after you've companioned with the person. I don't think you can do that at the beginning. I think you do that when the relationship is established. When you're talking with people in whatever, in their grief, and what we tend to do is we tend to get this backwards, okay? Where the caregiver uses way far more words than the care receiver. And the model that I always propose is that the person receiving the care is going to say 3, 4, 5 times as much as the person giving the care. And sometimes my response to a bunch of words is, yeah. Which is permission to keep going. Yeah.
It was interesting that you mentioned SIS because my nephew, they lost a baby about 6 to 8 years ago, and they, you know, they had a child that was older, and since they've had a child that was younger, but you know, every Christmas the deceased child is on the card, and you know, it makes you so sad. I mean, all you can really do is pray.
And that's how they choose to grieve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it just, I don't know. It's like it's never, not that it ever goes away, but sometimes it does soften a little with time, but it never goes away.
Yeah, and that's why when we go back to Kubler-Ross, people kind of at the word acceptance, because we never really fully accept it. We acknowledge. A lot of people have changed number 5 to, I'm able to acknowledge the loss. I'm able to move on. But I never fully accept it. And that's okay too.
That sometimes can they, in a sense, just kind of be in denial for
Sure.
a long, long, long time.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. George?
You had one slide up there about reminiscence, and I thought almost the opposite of reminiscence, but sometimes can work at some time farther away from the immediacy of the death, is to say, well, one of my favorite times was when we did such and such. So you start a reminiscence of some pleasant memory.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we do. That's what reminiscing is. And that's good grief work. I invite people, if they're inclined, to journal. When they get into a grief process, if they want to journal, because they can look back and see where they are. Again, I think if we don't really take care of this, a lot of times, again, we see people who move into some pretty significant depressive disorders, and then we have 2 issues to deal with. Okay. What other questions? We have time. Yes. Okay. Question? Oh, you went on the mic.
I'm waiting for the mic. Okay, what about you talking about what about you were talking about Sunday early wrong, right?
Okay.
So like I got a question for that and I got a comment for that too. What about it's hard to be silent, but do y'all realize that instead of people say, and you can't say nothing, don't say nothing at all, but I'm gonna put it a different way, like more people be silent, they like the dude say, like, you can only be silent for 8 seconds, but then the question, the way that I'm gonna put it, that, and you don't got nothing make sense, and you don't got nothing to make sense, don't say nothing at all, and then you got to wait for like almost like 8 more seconds. And then lucky that somebody at the last minute will come up with something that actually makes sense. And you will be like, wow, how you do that? So sometimes like you got to wait a long time for somebody to make sense, for you to understand.
You got it. Thank you. You got it, yeah. Questions? Any other questions?
Cliff's Notes version, why was Kubler-Ross unhappy she wrote the book?
Because people took it outside of the realm of this was written for people, stages that people went through who had been given a terminal diagnosis, and it was getting applied all over the place, which was not her intent. And whether or not she did a good job in the book or not, if you read the book, she made it clear, but people got real rigid that I'm going to be in denial for 12 days and 6 hours, and then I'm going to be angry. And so the practitioners, the caregivers who bought into it were really boxing people in who were going through these normal. And so in a time of despair, and she was a twin, and when she was writing this, her twin sister had just died, and she was in a significant grief response herself. But I think it was like utter frustration how people have misapplied her work. And I think when we can, and we've come back around to say, this is a model that's very fluid, and if we understand the model, it's very helpful because we allow people to, what people were doing, that's why I want to show the wings clip, because that's what people were doing. I'm done.
She also did a lot of research with children and youth.
She did. I think she was trained as a child and adolescent psychiatrist first. Yeah. She made some real contributions. Yes.
Do you agree that the grieved can see the sincerity and the expression of the individual? I don't know that you have to say anything. Recently, 2 of my brothers died in the last 6 months, and people didn't have to say anything. I knew they cared.
Yeah. So the question is, do I agree
that you don't have to say anything? That people the grieved can see it in your facial expression or just the way you reach out to them?
Yeah.
Whether you hug them or whatever.
Yeah, and most of us, unfortunately, most of us live out of our head, and we don't live as much in our gut, which is really where we live. Okay, this is where we live. So when we go into situations like this, crisis situations or grieving situations, we tend to come out of our head, and it's not helpful. Okay, it's helpful if you're trying to plan a funeral. Okay, but if you're trying to help someone to process their grief, God's first language is silence. Everything else is but a poor translation. And so I think we need to get comfortable with sitting with and being with. And the people who have been my pastors, are the people who've been comfortable to come and sit and not have any compulsion, not feel compelled at all to say anything, who can come and sit.
Well, I think you can sympathize with your eyes. And
Exactly. And your presence. Yeah, the ministry of presence, for me, far surpasses the ministry of doing. You know, I appreciate, and I tell pastors that when there's a funeral, if there's a funeral today, don't go back over to the house. I mean, there are plenty of people and food and flowers and cards, and circle the calendar for October the 19th. And make a pastoral visit October the 19th, because food's been eaten or thrown out, the flowers have died, and for the most part the cards have stopped coming, and the shock and numbness, if that's the case, is worn off, and it seems like the whole world has snapped back to reality except for me. And so circle the calendar and make that visit in 2 weeks, which is good for all of us, because that's when the pain sets in.
It's over 10 seconds.
You couldn't stand it, could you? Yes, ma'am.
I lost my parents this summer and in the spring, and I didn't grieve until recently. And just recently, I'm starting to have big problems with remembering concerns, I guess, as we take things out of the house, clear it out, get it ready to leave it. But only recently, I've been through months where I was just fine, and now I'm just, is that normal?
Yes. Thank you. Because, yeah, George, thank you, George. Emptying the house is another loss.
The house is all for 60 years.
Yeah, it's the reality of the deaths, and it's an extension of the loss. And thank you, okay? Thank you. Because sometimes, grief is really tricky. Okay, and so sometimes it just kind of hangs out there, and it doesn't bother us, and we think we're doing fine. Okay, and then 5 or 6 months later, it just like locusts. And so, yeah, and so if you told me that you started grieving 10 days after the second death, would that be normal? Yes. If you tell me that you start grieving 6 months after the death, would that be normal? Yes. If you tell me you start grieving a year after, is that normal? Yes. Thank you, because it's all normal. There is not one way to do this. Okay? And so, yeah. And now that it's coming up, the more we try to tamp it down, it's like running from a bad dog. It's going to keep chasing you. And you just need to go ahead and turn and face the bad dog, and it eventually go away.
It's kind of like somebody told me, just get in the habit of carrying a handkerchief, because you don't know if you're sitting in church in a certain song or what's going to hit you. So I've been carrying the handkerchief, and it seemed to work really well. But it may be a couple of months after the fact. It may be a year down the road. Just a certain song.
Yeah, I was telling Susan, y'all ought to be real proud of me, because Sandra's bucket list included going to Plains, Georgia to hear Jimmy Carter teach Sunday school. And you gotta want to go to Plains, Georgia. Okay? And I was born and raised in Atlanta and loved Jimmy Carter. And he was elected president in '76. Okay? He was governor of Georgia several years before that when my dad died. And so Sandra somehow got us front row seats at the Maranatha Baptist Church on Sunday morning to hear Jimmy Carter teach Sunday school. He was 92 on Saturday. But when he walked out, it hit me that my dad never got to know Carter as president. He got to know as governor, but not as president. And I had that little twin. And so we don't ever know what's going to, that was 40-something years ago, people. It still hurts. We went to a concert for him Saturday night, and Sandra, the person she is, went to celebrations at Martin Boutonniere. I said, you're going to be arrested. You're going to be in the Americas City Jail, and I'm going to have to bail you out. So Saturday night at the concert, she gets it to the lady at the church who's in charge, and who gets it to Carter's press secretary. And so Sunday morning, he comes walking out to teach Sunday school, wearing the boutonniere. And Sandra just said, hey, look. And he walked up, and he was standing there, and he said, who gave you this boutonniere? I said, she did. But in all that moment, I thought about my dad dying in 1970. So there are always these stories, and it felt good to kind of tear up and to reminisce. Yeah. Yes, it's normal. Keep grieving. Question?
I don't have a question. I'm just going to say.
Okay.
I don't belong to your church.
Well, I don't either. Hang on. We're taping this live, and so here's a microphone.
I'm trying to hold it together so I can read it.
It's okay.
My daughter sent me an email telling me about this, and I am currently grieving for my cousin. My just lost him. And this is not what I expected, but I learned so much tonight so that I know when I'm faced with helping someone that's in the situation I'm in now, that I think I will have the tools that I need. Yep.
Okay.
So thank you for allowing me to speak.
Maybe I'm being too pragmatic, but early in this grieving process, there's things that have to be done. You got to go to the bank. You got to go to the DMV. How do you deal with that and get people to do that and still get through that grieving process?
Do what you got to do.
Sometimes you do it to get away from everybody.
Well, I think the first thing that we do is we anticipate our deaths, and so there are a lot of decisions we can make that take a lot of burden off of family, whether it's financial issues or whether it's what's scripture you want read at your service or what hymn sung. My dream for any parish is that everybody in the parish has filled out some kind of form or something to let the rector know what's happening, pallbearers and whatever. Yeah, there are those pragmatic issues, but they don't have to be done immediately. They don't have to be done in the first month. These are things that can wait, and I can get to it when I feel like getting to it. Okay? And so I'm probably gonna not be in a hurry. I'm probably gonna encourage somebody not be in a hurry. And I'm probably gonna ask somebody to go with me because my mind's pretty cluttered and whatever. But I think one of the things we do, and I think it's part of the grief process, if I hurry up and get these things done, I'm kind of gonna take care of the grief. Well, that's not true. Okay. 2 days after my dad died, I went and sold his car. One of the worst decisions I ever made.
Yeah.
Because I was operating in a world of grief.
When I worked as a jeweler for many years, I would have many women. Oh, the voice is loud enough. I would have many women come in right after the funeral and say, "What do I do with my wedding rings?" And I would say, "Put them back on and come back in a year."
Thank you.
And many came back in a year and said, "Thank you."
Yeah. That's good care. What you were saying is,
you're not thinking straight right now.
Well, I was going to say something nicer. What you're saying is slow down. Take your time. Don't be in a hurry. Don't rush the process.
Didn't take advantage.
Yeah. They would never do that. Not that group. Yes.
I lost one husband 30 years ago and one 10 years ago next month. I still have both wedding rings on my finger.
Okay.
It's just the way I feel.
That's great. Yeah, and see, and there are other people who will take the wedding ring off the day after the funeral, and that's okay too. You know, we can't get into all these prescriptions about what's right, what's wrong, and what's good and bad, and normal and not normal. There are no rules here. So that's what feels good for you. Okay?
Yeah, I got one more question. Everybody everybody gonna go to different ways about it. Like we say, and you lose somebody you really, really, really care about, and who had your back everything, and you were like your best friend or your sister or your brother or anybody. Sometimes it's really hard to go the right way or go the wrong way, but you can't, any way you go, sometimes you really, really, really got to think about it, and you can't get your mind on it. You at the Lord, we're ready to go, and the Lord be using people all the time anyway, so eventually one day you gonna feel bad, but then when you forget about it later on, you gonna realize that the Lord talking to you everything gonna be okay. So that person want you to live your life the best way you can, because that person know you love them until the end.
Okay.
And then everything will be all right.
Ultimately. Yeah. We have one more question, I think. Right here.
I was just going to share, when you were talking about the rings and that kind of thing. My husband died 22 years ago, and I wore my wedding rings and put his away and all that for, I don't even know if it was 2 months or 6 months, I don't remember. But then I remember that when my husband was a priest, and when he, there was a lady who was in our congregation who lost her husband, and she came to him and said, I don't feel like wearing my rings anymore like they are. But is it a sacrilege to have them made into other rings, some other kind of rings that I would wear? And my husband said, being the Scots-Irishman that he was, he said, no, that's perfect. You know, he said, it's not a sacrilege. You can have them made, and then you can enjoy them, and they won't just sit in a box in the drawer. You know, if you don't feel like wearing them, then that's fine, yeah. And I didn't know that before he died, but then the lady told me that after he died.
That's great.
And I thought, what a great idea, because I didn't really feel like wearing mine. So I took his ring, and I had a wedding band, and then I had my wedding ring set, and I had them melted down and made into 2 rings. I had enough gold to have them made into 2 rings, and one of them I'm wearing tonight, which I wear more often, is the one without the diamonds, but it's got opals in it, which are my birthstone. And one of the opals was a pendant, and the other 2 opals were earrings that my husband had given me. And so I wear this one almost all the time. So, you know, like you said, everybody's different.
Everybody's different. Well, we're going to stop. 7:31. We'll finish next week.